Well, thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate the time, and thank you, Commissioner Bettencourt, to be part of our professional development days and agreeing to be in the big hot seat today.
Of course, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you on this rainy Thursday. So, without further ado, I think we should just jump into some Q&A.
Let's do it.
Get it going.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
So we fielded a few questions and from some of our members, and the first one being the current homeowners market has made it very difficult for some insureds to obtain coverage. Is the department working with carriers regarding the availability of coverage, pricing, things of that nature?
Sure. The short answer to that is yes. We obviously acknowledge the fact that we are seeing hardening markets, and there's a number of reasons for that, of course. But first and foremost, the thing that we tell consumers is to shop their coverage. If they're not happy with the quote they're getting, shop that coverage around, work with an independent agent.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously see the landscape in the market in a lot more broad and expansive way than the individual consumer will.
Right.
So that's kind of the first piece of advice that we always give. The other thing is we do communicate and meet on what seems like almost a weekly basis at this point with the New Hampshire Domestics and the Industry Association. We get their feedback and perspective on how we as regulators can be helpful to not only industry but to consumers as well as they are navigating the pathway through this harder market.
Mm-hmm.
Then finally, I would say we're very, very active in communicating and advocating before our legislature for proposals that will help the current situation and against some proposals that we think are going to make the current dynamic worse. So those are some of the ways that we've been involved. As I said, we've tried to work through this difficult market.
Well, I love the message, work with the independent agency force. I mean,
Absolutely.
We've got our pulse on it every day, and we're doing our best. So thank you for your work in the legislature as well. Some surrounding states have a residual market for property. In other words, when you can't find coverage, you can go to the residual market outside of the standard or surplus market. Right now, I think there's 33 states with a fair plan. Is that something we're looking here in New Hampshire to consider?
I have never supported or have been a big fan of fair plans. I can't foresee myself supporting a fair plan proposal. Fundamentally for me, having governments competing with as an active player in the private market, I think is always a bad idea.
Yeah.
The government always seems to have some sort of advantage, right? Because at the end of the day, if an agency or an insurance company makes a set of bad decisions, they go out of business. Governments never do, right? They always have the backstop of the taxpayer there. So I just don't like that dynamic. So I don't foresee that being something that we would propose. And I would say as well, to borrow a phrase, we here in New Hampshire can see Massachusetts from our house.
Mm-hmm.
And, when Massachusetts implemented their fair plan, it was intended to be the plan of last resort. And yet how that has played out is it has actually become the plan of first resort. And it has therefore undermined their private market. And I don't think that benefits anybody. And additionally, I'm not going to call out any states, but we have seen the horror stories from some states who have implemented these fair plans, and they've been horribly run, massively inefficient, unable to pay claims in a timely manner. And that has just never been the New Hampshire way. So I don't see us supporting that anytime soon.
It's good to hear, in my opinion, and I think a lot of others as well. So what is the insurance department's stance on banks offering lower interest rates to borrowers in order to get their insurance coverage?
So as I understand this question, I think fundamentally what you're asking is kind of a rebate question.
Yeah.
And with rebates, there are a robust set of statutes that are on the books here in New Hampshire that regulate them under the principle of unfair trade practices. And so while rebates here in New Hampshire are not blanketly prohibited, the devil for them really is in the details.
Mm-hmm.
And so our team would need to see what those details are. They would need to see what the arrangements look like. They would need to see the terms of the deal, the relationship that is had with the bank, so that we could get a better understanding of exactly what's going on there. And so what I would encourage people who have a concern about this to do is to contact our team here at the department. We're happy to give a look to it. And if there's something that's not right there, we'll certainly look into that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's good advice. Contact the insurance department, let you know specifics, and let you do the work from there.
That's what we're paid to do.
Absolutely. Well, we've at the Big I have gotten some calls concerning the fact that carriers are underwriting guidelines for ages, conditions of roofs, beginning to make coverage really difficult to place. Protection class as well. How, if at all, can the department help when underwriting guidelines become really stringent during a hard market?
So fundamentally, the problem as it relates to roofs is often with the contractor trying to take advantage of the consumer. And a simple example is you'll have some minor roof damage, some shingles have come off the roof, and a consumer reaches out to a contractor to get that repaired. The contractor comes out and tries to convince the consumer that they need an entire new roof. And that's obviously very problematic when that consumer then engages with their agent or their insurance company. There's real friction there. It's important to remember that this is no small issue. Our friends down in the state of Florida nearly cratered their entire P&C market, in large part due to shenanigans around roof repairs.
Right.
And obviously we don't want to see that here in New Hampshire. But to the extent that consumers are having issues with getting coverage or finding affordable coverage, again, our message for them is to work with an independent agent, shop that coverage around. If the consumer doesn't like one company's particular underwriting guidelines, try a different a competitor. We have a competitive market here in New Hampshire with over 100 carriers offering homeowners coverage of some kind. There are better deals available if, again, they're willing to be smart, which I pride myself on the fact that we live in a state with a lot of really intelligent people. So be good consumers, work with your assets, as I said, like an independent agent, and see if there's a better deal that is out there. Importantly, too, it's important to remember that here at the department, we don't have the ability to disallow an underwriting guideline simply because we don't like it. That's just not the statutory authority that we have. And so whether it's roofs or some other thing, what we look for is to ensure that that underwriting guideline is being consistently and fairly applied. And so those are the things that we look for. If the legislature wants to give me more power to have a little bit more discretion in taking a look at underwriting guidelines, they certainly can do so. But that's where we are with roofs.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. The independent agency force can open up the lines of communication with additional underwriters and hopefully find a solution.
That's right.
So on that same line, we've had some complaints about guidelines surrounding solar panels and on roofs, and that becomes more popular as you look around the state every year. With renewable energy becoming increasingly popular, more affordable, do we foresee any issues?
We haven't seen any as of yet.
Yeah.
I checked in with our team this morning to see if any had come in. We haven't received any yet. Now, that's not to say, of course, that they won't. Right. Because as you've mentioned, I think as these opportunities for solar energy become more and more widespread, consumers begin to appreciate the benefit and the asset of it, it will become more prominent. And so we'll obviously keep an eye out for any issues that come up, and we'll react accordingly. But we're not aware of any companies that are refusing to write because of solar panels, so we'll see how that continues to play out.
Good to hear. And then I think it's a question everyone has. How does the department review and approve new rate filings?
Sure. So first and foremost, in a competitive market, here again, we don't have the ability to just disallow a rate because we don't like it. Trust me, I wish sometimes I did. Here again, what we look for is to ensure that the rates are not unfairly discriminatory and that they are adequate. There has to be actuarial backup to the rate request. And so, as I said, in a competitive market, we have not a ton of discretion over that beyond those two factors. In non-competitive markets, we obviously have a little bit more flexibility there. There are only, I'm proud to say, 2 markets in New Hampshire that are considered non-competitive. The first is workers' comp, and the second is medical malpractice. That is not unique to New Hampshire. I think all 50 states are struggling with competitiveness in those 2 areas, so we're not unique that way. We do have, so when the market is non-competitive in those 2 areas, for example, we do have the ability to make sure that the rate is not excessive. But beyond that, it's just looking at whether it is discriminatory or it is inadequate. What I would say, though, that our actuarial team, and I think this is important to understand, our actuarial team is seeing the losses that these companies are experiencing and taking note of the current economic trends. And so as a result of that, they are seeing rates that, while no one wants to see rates going up, of course, they are justified and supported by the economic realities. But we did really try to help consumers better understand these dynamics Last month, we held our first ever P&C Summit. We brought in some nationally renowned experts to kind of help consumers understand what the dynamics are in the market, what's driving those premiums the way that they are. And so we talked about things like climate and the fact that catastrophic losses for companies are happening more and more frequently and with greater severity. That's obviously a huge factor for the industry. Reinsurance costs and those dynamics play a huge part in it as well. And look, while the supply chain in this country has significantly improved since COVID, it's not back to where we want it to be. It's not back to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, ask anybody who's waiting for a part for their vehicle. Right. Sometimes it's incredibly difficult to get, and they have to wait a long time for their car to finally be repaired. Right. And I think we all appreciate that there are still inflationary factors in our economy, as well as litigation costs. So all of those things factor in to driving what the current market looks like, and ultimately what the consumer experiences in terms of premium.
And to your point, the supply chain has come back, but you still need people to take those products.
The workforce.
Put them in the workforce there to
issue.
Fix the claims, to resolve the matters. I mean, that's just an ongoing concern throughout our economy.
No doubt about it.
Having the labor force to get the work done. Well, I'm also hearing a general statement that we can't just take action against something because we don't like it.
Right.
There has to be reason behind it. There has to be some more information. So
we here in New Hampshire like to think that we're the captains of our own destiny.
Right.
We do a great job here. We've got high quality of life metrics across the board. Our state government, while not perfect because none is, I think does a great job of keeping those high quality of life standards and making good financial decisions. But the fact of the matter is that the insurance industry is not siloed that way. What we experience here in New Hampshire is obviously different than what other states experience, but they still have an impact on us. And it's not just across the country, really. It's across the world. When you're talking about reinsurance, that's a worldwide issue.
Absolutely.
When you talk about those catastrophic losses, they span from the hurricane that devastates the Gulf Coast in Florida to the wildfires that you see out in California to those crazy winter events that you're seeing out in the Rocky Mountains. All of that comes together and has a ripple effect that eventually impacts the New Hampshire consumer. And like I said, I think that we like to think that we're protected from all of that, but unfortunately we're not. And so consumers, I think, benefit and become better consumers when they understand the broader dynamics that are at play.
Oh, absolutely. Those large catastrophic claims that are happening across the country absolutely impact New Hampshire. Just because they're not happening here doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on the rates.
That's right.
Because to your point, they're not just national, they're global.
That's right.
Yeah. So how do we balance the need for fair pricing with consumers and fair revenue for insurance companies? Is that something we get involved in?
Not particularly. Yeah. I think in many ways the free market helps strike that balance.
Absolutely.
If a company is putting forward rates to consumers that render the consumer unable to afford them, or large groups of consumers unable to afford them, then obviously those consumers are going to go to a competitor.
Right.
And I think that helps keep everybody accountable to ensure that they're, we obviously don't allow a company to undermine the market. That would get back to the discussion we had about rate filings and ensuring that they're adequate. But as I said, if a company wants to be an outlier in terms of the premiums and opportunities that they're offering, they're going to suffer the consequences of that.
Right.
So I think that holds the system accountable. Importantly, though, as you look at the companies, I think it's important to not solely look at a company's profit for any single given year. I think you've got to appreciate what they're experiencing as a trend.
Right.
Because you could have a company that is doing really well one year and then gets absolutely hammered with losses the next or the year previous. And so I think you've got to, again, look at that broader perspective to understand what are the trends that company is experiencing and how does that compare to the overall trends within the industry. And I think that will help tell you the story.
Absolutely. And I think the independent agency force can, of course, benchmark carriers from one to another. As you explained, we've got a scope of a lot of carriers that we represent. We can benchmark what's fair and unfair and get a pulse on a carrier who might be outpricing themselves, and that will be to their own detriment. Really.
Absolutely. They'll suffer the consequences.
Yep. Have you seen any issues with this newer type of, speaking of underwriting and companies making decision making on rate? But there's a lot of AI being used, going paperless, using these algorithms that sometimes frustrate us as independent insurance agents because it's hard for us to even figure out. Are you seeing any issues arising from the use of AI?
No particular issues because, in terms of AI, I don't think that any of us right now are far enough along into this to truly understand what those prominent issues are going to be. We're vigilant. We're watching. We're seeing how this plays out very, very carefully. And I think to an extent we're trying as regulators to get out in front of some of the issues that we are really concerned about and guarding against those issues becoming a problem, which is what motivated us to adopt the NAIC model bulletin around AI governance. We don't want to see unfair discrimination. We want to ensure that the underwriting guidelines are being appropriately applied. And we, most importantly, want to ensure that there is a human being overseeing and in control of this technology. We can't, nor should we, entirely outsource human brain power.
Right. Absolutely.
That could lead to, obviously, a number of different problems. And so as long as there is accountability, as long as there is oversight, then I think there's a really exciting opportunity. But as an example of what I was talking about, a company can have the best technology for, say, adjusting a claim. And that's all great. But we still want to see that there is a person overseeing that technology in those algorithms. But at the same time, we obviously want to encourage industry to adopt innovations that can reduce costs, make the systems more efficient, and ultimately improve the overall experience for a consumer. We don't want to get in the way of that. And so in the years to come, I think we'll be looking to find the appropriate balance there.
Yeah, I agree. You can't undermine the importance of the human connection throughout these
Absolutely.
claims. Insurance claims become very emotional, as we all know. And whether it's a homeowner's claim, a business claim, workers' comp claim, there's a lot of human emotions involved, and AI is not going to get rid of that.
We see that a lot with our seniors.
Yeah.
Our seniors do not feel comfortable unless they're talking to a human being. They're just not getting that peace of mind. They're not feeling 100% confident that the information that they're getting is something that they can rely upon unless they're talking to a person. So I think you're absolutely right.
Absolutely. So we're going to move on a little bit to the guaranteed fund and how it works. I think there's a lot of misconception of how it works, why it's there.
Well, I hope that no one will ever truly need to understand how the guarantee fund works because that means something really, really bad has happened. In short, I think the easiest way to summarize it is that it is the fund that all licensed companies contribute into so that in the event that one of those companies becomes insolvent, it helps to pay the claims. It doesn't pay, let me note, it does not pay all of the claims. There are limits to them, but it is certainly better than the consumer being completely out. And so it's a backstop for consumers in the event that the company that they're insured by begins to have significant financial difficulties and ultimately becomes insolvent. So I'm proud to say that we here in New Hampshire have not had a domestic insurance company need use of the guarantee fund since the mid-1990s, and our team here is dedicated to ensuring that we won't need to use it anytime soon here.
That's good. It helps us maintain our competitive marketplace too.
Absolutely.
In insurance rates, we see what's going on down in Florida and carriers coming insolvent, pulling out. Rates, talk about homeowners rates down there.
It's crazy.
You got nothing to complain about up here when you look at those. So
our friends in Florida, the insurance department down in Florida is a great, great group of people. Unfortunately, they've got a legislature that has some not so great ideas sometimes. And they're doing the best they can.
Right. On a state that hangs out in the ocean.
Absolutely.
A lot of hurricanes. So move on to the next question. Has there been any increase in consumer complaints due to this hard market that we're living in right now?
Well, look, anytime premiums go up, consumers are not happy. Heck, I'm not happy. Right. But so we do see a fair amount of feedback about why premiums are going up, and we do our best to explain to consumers some of those issues that you and I talked about that are driving the dynamics within the current market. And we try to help them understand what options are available to them and what the best potential opportunity or option might be for them, given whatever particular situation that they're in. I always try to remind consumers, and really everybody, that market conditions at any particular point never last forever.
Right.
And so things will get better.
Mm-hmm.
Things will eventually get better. It may take some time. There are all sorts of theories and thoughts about when this current market might begin to soften again. I'll just simply say that hopefully it's sooner rather than later,
Right.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
But I do want to again stress, and again a little bit of background about what we do here at the department. When we manage a P&C complaint that comes in from a consumer, our focus is really on our unfair trade practices statute.
Mm-hmm.
That is our focus. We don't handle claims or complaints relating to coverage or liability disputes. We feel that falls outside of our regulatory jurisdiction, which, as I said, lives within that unfair trade practices statute. And we think that those liability and coverage disputes are appropriately handled by the judicial branch,
Mm-hmm.
because that is the branch that is tasked with being the finders and adjudicators of facts.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the area to go if you've got an issue in those two areas. So, I think going beyond that unfair trade practices statute gets us outside of our appropriate regulatory scope here at the department.
That makes sense. And hence why we as agents carry errors and omissions coverage,
Yep.
so we can
Yep.
defend ourselves if it goes to that judicial step.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing any common types of complaints right now in this hardening market? Or in general, I guess, overall?
In general, I think folks are surprised when renewal time comes up and they're seeing that a policy that had previously cost them X is now costing them Y, and it's X%, more.
Right.
They really struggle with that. Consumers get loyal to the companies that they've done business with for a long time.
That's
and
true.
so sometimes it's hard for them to part ways and to shop that coverage around and potentially find a new insurer.
Yeah.
We encourage them to do it anyway. But those are the hard conversations that we're seeing these days.
Yeah. Loyalty to a fault at times.
Yes.
It's good to just encourage them to use the independent agent who
Absolutely.
has other options for them.
That's right. That's right.
Do you think there's anything we haven't really mentioned that's hot topics now?
I think a couple of things that I think are always useful for folks to bear in mind, and our friends out there, our independent agent friends out there to remember is, if you receive a call from our enforcement or fraud unit, please do call them back.
Yeah, that's a good
It
point.
does not most of the time mean that you are in trouble. They are simply trying to gather some information, gather some facts on a referral or a complaint that's come in, and they're just trying to get to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm.
So please do work with them. Make sure to return that call. I'm excited to say that I believe in June we are going to be restarting our Lunch with the Commissioner series. We'll be going to all of the counties in New Hampshire.
Oh, good.
We'll be hosting a lunch. They can come, agents and producers can come chat with me, let me know what they're seeing, let me know what the dynamics on the ground are looking like. I think it's really important for me, or for really any leader of a state agency, to do the best they can to get outside of the bubble of Concord.
Absolutely.
And to get out there and really get into the communities, have some in-depth, genuine conversations, and see what's going on out there and get that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to help us be better able to understand what consumers are facing. And let's face it, agents are consumers too. When we talk about customer service, it's not just the consumer. It's agents, it's companies.
Mm-hmm.
I take a much broader definition of customer service than some others might. So this is part of further fulfilling that mission, is to have those conversations and go right into the community. So again, we'll be starting that up in June.
And as independent agents, we need to get out there and have lunch with the commissioner and voice our what we're hearing on the streets. I mean, that's where your ears out there in the day-to-day. So we need to take advantage of this situation.
Your staff, your folks should know that our staff here scopes out the restaurants well in advance. We make sure we've got good food. So it's always a good time.
Independent agents like to eat.
Yeah, and it costs you nothing.
Yeah,
so it's on
even
us.
better.
So I know that I've been getting a lot of feedback from some agents about issues related to location and writing for location. And some companies seemingly take an attitude that they don't want to write in certain parts of the state.
Right.
Folks should know that I have gotten the New Hampshire Domestic Association and their related entities together with Joan
Okay.
at the Big I, and they're working on finding some compromise language to address that issue. We obviously do not allow in New Hampshire the ability to non-write somebody just based purely on location. But there's obviously some details there and a balance to be struck. So I know that those folks are working on that, and we'll take a look at what they come up with, and we may or may not make some tweaks, but that is an issue that is on our radar, and it is something that we do intend to take some action on at some point. So agents should be aware of that. The other two things I would say is, first, if an agent has a concern with a company, we always encourage them to come to us. The tricky thing, though, is when we ask, well, who is doing this? They really don't want to talk about that. And I understand why. They don't want to lose the assignment. But it really does tie our hands when we don't know exactly who is doing what.
Right.
And if it's a across the board thing, all right, that gives us a little bit more to work with. But if there's a specific practice being done by a specific company, it really is helpful if they're able to share with us who they have the concern
Or
with.
how do you track the trends?
That's right. It's really, really difficult. And the last thing I'll leave you with is, we here at the department have a constant desire to improve. We think we've got a pretty good system here. I think it's served the department and the state well over many, many years. But if there is something that we are doing that you think can be improved upon, do not hesitate to let us know. If there's a state out there that has a better process or approach to whatever the issue might be, let us know. We'll go out and take a look at what that state is doing. And as they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
That's right.
If somebody's got a better widget, we want the widget.
Right.
So let us know if there's anything we could be doing better in your view.
Yeah, the door is open, and agents can also reach out to the Big I for assistance as well. And to your point earlier, Commissioner Bettencourt, you have a very friendly staff. So if they do call, the call back, the conversation will be a good one, and you have a nice professional staff, and they're always a pleasure to work with.
We pride ourselves on that, and that's important. That's an important part of our culture here at the department. There are advantages and disadvantages to being a small state.
Right.
But one of the real advantages is when you need somebody, you know exactly who to call. They're going to pick up the phone, and they're going to have an answer turned around for you pretty darn quickly. And again, that's something that we pride ourselves on, and we're going to continue with that attitude.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions that we need to field from the...
We do, yeah.
All right.
This is really fun. So Cara was actually relayed a question earlier today. Does the department have a stance on the use of drones for inspections? And then I have a follow-up on that as well.
So I think our position has been that, drones can be useful. Drones can be useful, but that the consumer should have the ability to say, no, the actual condition of that roof is not what is portrayed in that drone shot. I want somebody to come out and look at this. We do think that the consumer should have that option. If the drone takes a picture, the consumer looks at the picture, finds that the assessment is fair and accurate, then that's great.
Yeah.
It can stop there. But it's when that consumer says, no, that's not an accurate depiction of what I see with my eyes. I want somebody else to physically get their eyes on this. We think that they should have that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
That actually plays perfectly into the follow-up question from Selena that says, what about using drones and having policies non-renewed due to the aerial inspection?
I think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Again, it really wraps into the larger conversation that we're having about AI. We cannot be outsourcing all of the human brain power to the machines. We just can't do that. We cannot let the machines take over the world. There are a number of movies out there about what happens when you do that. So, there again, I think the consumer should have the opportunity to say, hey, you non-renewed me for these reasons. You obtained that information via a drone. No, I want somebody to actually come out, look at this property, and see that what's depicted there is not what is actually taking place on this property.
That's a great point.
Beautiful. My next question is also from Selena. What about insurance carriers requiring higher minimum deductibles on their base policies, specifically monoline policies?
Good question. I hadn't given much thought to that. What I would say is, because there are competitive markets, if those dynamics don't work for the consumer, shop that coverage around. Work with your agent to see if there are a better set of guidelines and dynamics that are that provide the consumer with a better deal.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. And then, wow, you're like flying through these questions that I have for you. The last question that I have, and everyone, please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat, but the last question I have is that I have a friend who works for a software company that is writing software to use for the settlement of claims via automation and algorithms. Is this something that the department will allow?
Good question. We'd need to see the details of it. We'd need to see the details of what they're doing. We would contrast that to what we've put forward in the AI bulletin. Again, I'm not inherently against, in any way, shape, or form, am I against innovation. Again, if there are ways to make these systems more efficient, reduce cost, improve the overall experience for the consumer, I'm all for it. But there have to be guardrails that protect consumers from some of the potential unintended consequences in ensuring that we're not dealing with a discriminatory issue.
Right.
So we would need to see exactly what that looked like, and then again, compare that to the regulatory guidelines that we've put forward thus far. I do want to set expectations. So we issued the AI model bulletin, I believe it was last month, early last month. We're going to give this thing at minimum a year to see how things play out, to see how things evolve.
Right.
And this is not just D.J. Bettencourt and the team here at the New Hampshire Insurance Department that are considering this. Remember, the AI model bulletin came from the NAIC. So you've got regulators from all 50 states and U.S. territories who are constantly coming together, having these conversations, better understanding what's coming online, what the impacts of that might be, and how we as regulators need to take appropriate precautions or action. So collectively, we're going to really be keeping our eye on the ball as these things continue to evolve.
Yeah. And new technology takes time to build trends.
It certainly does.
You're not going to get a trend in a couple months. So a year plus out, it makes a lot of sense.
That's right. And I think, whenever the first market conduct exam on this AI model bulletin takes place, and I don't foresee that for at least 2 or 3 years, it will come through the NAIC as a multi-state market conduct exam. No single state's going to have the ability to contract with the expertise that's going to be needed to understand how all of this is playing out and how you appropriately ascertain whether the practices of those companies is in comportment with the bulletin. So it'll be a team effort.
For sure.
Beautiful. That actually plays nicely into our next question. Do you mind commenting on the legislative session that's currently happening, and what sort of laws or changes should we be aware of or paying more closely attention to?
Boy, how much time do we have? We're doing an entire webinar on the current legislative season coming up. I believe it's next week. There's been a lot of traffic in our legislature this season. It's been one of the more active legislative seasons that I've experienced since coming to the department. There's a lot of moving pieces. It's obviously a long process. We're just getting to what they call crossover this week, which is when all of the House bills go over to the Senate and the Senate bills go over to the House. They call it crossover. I'm a sports guy. I call it halftime.
Halftime.
And so there are a couple of pieces of legislation that concern us. One of them has to do with eliminating the cost of consortium claim cap for those types of lawsuits. The bill originally started off by removing the cap entirely. The Senate since compromised and just raised the cap. My concern is when we're in a hard market, I think anything that introduces further uncertainty into that market is not good. And so we're already seeing in some cases, and I appreciate that this might not be of particular passion or concern to independent agents, but it certainly is to me. One of the hardest markets in New Hampshire is professional and general liability insurance for nonprofits. And obviously those nonprofits are doing absolutely critical work in our communities. And they're not able to get the coverages that they need to provide the important services that they do. Where that really manifests itself within state government is over the past several years, the legislature and the governor have brought on a number of different reforms and programs to improve our state's mental health and SUD infrastructure and system. Well, the state doesn't run those programs. The state makes the funding and the guidelines available, and then we contract with those nonprofits to actually stand up and operationalize those programs. But as a condition to contract with the state, you have to have those coverages. So we've got all of these exciting programs that are available, and we're seeing fewer and fewer nonprofits who are able to actually bid and get the contracts to, as I said, operationalize those services. Legislation such as what I've described, tinkering around with the caps on those litigation costs is going to make that situation even worse. And, I think the hardening market, everybody kind of falls somewhere on a scale. You just kind of push everybody a little bit further over to the really hard market side of that scale, and that's obviously not what we want to see.
Yeah.
So, as I said, to kind of wrap up, the legislature has been active for the most part. There's been some good reforms that we've worked with the legislature on. A lot of stuff on the health insurance side of things, which I know you don't deal too much with.
Nope.
But in your world, I think those bills that seek to tinker with our current litigation regulatory environment, very, very problematic.
Yeah. And we've been talking about that at the Big I in our board meetings as well, of when they wanted to remove the cap, now they want to just increase the cap, but there's no data behind wanting to do any of it.
No.
So, and I think that is the main concern. What really is the purpose of even going down this road?
Right. We're going to continue here at the department to really stress that if the legislature is going to move forward with any sort of change to the current environment, that they do so with an actual analysis in hand to understand in real concrete terms what those costs are going to end up being for the consumer.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah. For our first timers, actually, this is a very good question for them because we did have a lot of people chiming in that this is their first time actually doing anything with the insurance commissioner or these Q&As. Do you mind telling us what you do on the consumer side a little bit? I had a note saying that you were working on consumer guarantee contracts.
Yeah.
Do you mind vocalizing on that a little bit?
Sure. So let me kind of go wide and then I'll get to the specific question that was asked. So our consumer division here really is, and I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I really do mean it. They are the crown jewel of our department. There are 7 dedicated individuals to taking in consumer complaints. That's what they do all day, every day that they're here. And so whether it's an individual consumer, whether it's an agent, whether it's a provider, whether it's a shop owner, small business, whomever it might be, they can contact our consumer division and they're going to triage that case. They're going to do the fact finding. They're going to get the relevant information to determine whether there's something that we need to do to help that consumer. I would say that of the approximately 5,000 calls that we get every year, all but about 500 of them are consumers who are just looking for information. They don't understand what their policy is telling them. They don't understand, what's actual cash value. They don't know. On the health side, what are EOBs? They struggle with that. So there's just a lot of consumer education that goes on within our consumer division. And, I don't mean to get too far afield, but one thing that agents can really, really, really help us with, and that is to stress to consumers that the appropriate time for them to be reading their policy is not when they need to file a claim. Right. Because when they need to file a claim, they're under stress. The nature of insurance is such that when that thing happens, when you need your policy, it probably isn't good. Yeah. You've wrecked the car, trees fallen into the home, fire in the home, something stressful, unpleasant has happened. And so now they're not in a great frame of mind to dive into and comprehend a pretty technical document.
They don't want to hear any limitations. They don't want to hear any denials. At that point, it's too stressful.
Too stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, consumers fundamentally understand 2 things about insurance. They pay the premiums, and the policy is sitting in the safe or the drawer with the rest of the important papers that they hope they never have to see. Really work with them, really mentor them, stress that they can ask questions, stress that you're happy to help clarify anything in their policy that they don't understand, such that when that bad thing happens, they're in a much better position to be able to work with you or to try to figure out what they need to do with the company. Right. So I think the specific question, to finally get around to it, had to do with consumer guarantee contracts. we saw a trend, and let me say, the way we find these trends is when we see a large number of complaints come through our consumer division. So again, if there is an issue, bring it to our consumer division so that we have a better understanding whether this is an isolated issue or whether this is part of something larger that we need to address. With consumer guarantee contracts, we identified that it was a larger trend that needed to be addressed. Fundamentally, we were seeing really manipulative, improper, unethical marketing practices taking place with those policies. There were a few other things as well, but that was the heart of it. And so we brought a comprehensive reform package forward to the legislature. It is going through the legislature for the moment, knock on wood, fairly smoothly, but it's going to give us better regulatory oversight to understand who are these companies, who are writing for them, and how are they marketing these products. We are by no means looking to put drive any product out of our market. We're not looking to drive any companies from writing in the state. But we do need to make sure that they are conducting themselves in an appropriate and ethical manner. And so that's what we're looking to do.
Perfect.
That is perfect. And then I also have, I don't know if this is a funny ha-ha question. Someone was trying to make me laugh a little bit, especially since we are in the state of live free or die. But someone did ask if we'll ever have mandatory auto insurance with a laughy face afterwards.
Nope. Nope. and let me say, as backwards as some people in this country might think New Hampshire is for not doing that, the reality is that our rates of uninsured motorists are some of the lowest in the nation, despite the fact that those states mandate that their consumers have that coverage. And I always say this too, part of what helps keep our auto insurance market competitive is the fact that at the end of the day, if you really price a consumer out of the market, they're going to make what I think is a very, very bad decision, which is to not have the coverage. They're going to say to themselves, well, I don't travel a lot. I just kind of go around the town and I go to the grocery store, the post office. I don't need it. I never drive at night. I don't need it. It's horrible thinking. I do not endorse it. I hope not to see it. But at the end of the day, if you're not competitive, there will be a segment of consumer that just says, I'm just not going to go with it. And so because our market's competitive, because there are a lot of affordable options out there for consumers, the result of that is that, as I said, New Hampshire has one of the lowest uninsured rates in the nation. So I don't see the need for a mandate, and I don't think our legislature and our governor will either.
Right. I agree. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that we have some of the lowest uninsured motorists out there on the road today. So we're an affordable state. We're actually a pretty safe state in terms of having coverage back behind most of our motorists out there. So it's always interesting when this conversation comes up and how quickly we can put it back down.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. I have time. We have time for 2 more questions, and I have one that was sent to me in a direct message from. They might have come in late, so they just didn't know if it was answered already. But what is the department's stance on banks offering lower interest rates to borrowers who obtain insurance through the bank? This is against unfair trade practice law, and the person who asked has had this happen to them several times.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit earlier. And so fundamentally what you're talking about there is a rebate question. And so as you pointed out, what oversees rebates here in New Hampshire, they're not blanketly prohibited, but the unfair trade practices statutes that are on our books do regulate them. It regulates them. And so as I've said before, I'll say again, what's going to be really important is to understand the details of that arrangement. What the terms look like, what the relationship is with the bank, to understand whether or not that's going to be a permissible rebate arrangement or whether it's not. So we'd need to see the details. It's a fact-based analysis.
Oh, beautiful. Every time that I go to say something, I forget to unmute my mic. So the last question I have for you today is from actually one of our staff over at the Big I. Bob asks, should insurance companies get back to offering less covered perils? Does attempting to cover, I don't know if this is 2 questions, I apologize. Does attempting to cover many more risks increase the price of coverage?
Fundamentally, yes. I mean, obviously, the more you expose yourself to risk, the more you're going to have to appropriately price for that. So the short answer there is yes, if I understood it correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have the long answer for that? Go into a little bit more detail for us?
I mean, look, there's obviously an analysis that our financial regulation team goes through when a company is looking to write additional lines of business. We ensure that they're going to be financially able to do that. Do they have the appropriate reserves and all of those different components that go into their financial analysis? And so we don't just let companies write new lines willy-nilly. There's got to be financial assurance that they're going to be able to appropriately do that. They've obviously then have to file the product with us and go through all of that process. It is not something that you can snap your fingers and it's done. It's not a 24-hour process. So, before companies are exposing themselves to additional types of risk, they're going to go through our process to make sure that they're able to handle it, and that ultimately the consumer is going to be protected.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Do you mind letting us know how people can get in contact with you or anyone at the department if they were to have any questions?
Sure, they can call our consumer division, and AJ's going to tell me the number for that right now.
It's 1-800-852-3416.
There you go.
Do you mind saying that one more time, and I'll type that into the chat for everyone?
Yeah, 1-800-852-3416. You can also email consumer services at ins.nh.gov.
And let me do something that my staff always cringes when I do, but I worked for Governor Sununu for 5 years, so when he did it all the time, so I'll do it too. I'm going to give you my personal cell phone number, should you ever need to get in touch with me, which is 603-247-2868. Again, that's 603-247-2868. Sometimes the best way to get in touch with me is to shoot me a text. I do have 3 young, small kids.
Yeah.
They're pretty wild in the evenings. So if you need something turned around quick, sometimes a text is the best way to do it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you, Brett, for also being the leader of our question and answer today. And I have one final question, because we're all about asking these questions on National Pet Day. Do you have any love for fur babies at home?
I do. I have 2 cats. And just a very brief story. So I'm a University of New Hampshire graduate. So one of our cats is named Wildy, because that's their mascot's name. My wife made a poorer choice. She went to the University of Maine, which is the big rival. So the other cat's name is Bear, because they're the black bears.
Yeah.
And then just a month and a half ago, I was finally prevailed upon, otherwise known as I gave up and surrendered to my children. And we have a puppy French bulldog named Ellie.
Nice.
Sorry, I'm a dog person, so I do love cats, but I wanted to also pop in and say thank you to both of you so much for being here. As the ed director, this is usually sort of, you say that your staff is your crown jewel. This section is our crown jewel for this event. So I sincerely appreciate both of you taking the time to do this for us. We really, really appreciate it.
It is always my pleasure. Anytime you need me, I'll be there.
All right, awesome.
We have a bunch of thank yous in the chat as well, so thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Hey, thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much.
This is a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.